This video is for those that are doing the navigation on the side. Before we get started, I just want to mention that if you're interested in a website with a big image background, check out the first 5 minutes of this title right here. Okay, so let's get on with styling this. So the first thing that we need to do is get our aside to move over to the side to float to the left. And a good overview of floats can be had on the W3 Schools site. Right now all we have written for our side is just a background color of black that you can see showing up a little bit up here. And so let's go ahead and put in the float. And you can see with the float left, that's starting to work. You can see we've got some problems. We need to, in addition to putting padding in here, we need to get this to go all the way down to the bottom. And you can see that everything is floating. And in fact, what we should do before this gets lost is let's go ahead and turn our footer a solid color. So we'll write some code for the footer, and I don't think we've written any yet. Nope. So we could use the CSS panel, or we can just go ahead and give it a shot ourselves. And really all I want to do is put a background color in there. And we'll just make that blue. Finish that off with the semicolon. Do a save all. And then just take a look at where we're at right now in a browser. And example here on the W3 that's very close to what we're going to be doing here. So we can go ahead, go in here, borrow some code. And what we're looking for are these properties right here. So we'll take this whole chunk right here. And then we are going to paste that into the aside. And it looks like the one thing we don't need here is the background color. And then let's just clean this up a little bit. So this is what we have right now. And if we preview this in the browser, you can see that it's much closer to doing what it's supposed to do. Now, one thing right off the bat I can see is that the translation from my design, I went ahead and made this way too big in here. So let's take care of that. So the H1, I had it at 3M, probably should be closer to about 2.5 plus. If you compare this to my original design, I changed it. Instead of saying with the .com in here, I just removed that. And it was also way too close to the top. Since all of this stuff is inside of the aside, that's where I'm going to put the padding. And remember, padding it goes around the inside, if you will, of the item, and margin is on the outside. In fact, you know, if that gets confusing, it really helps sometimes just to look at this, what do they call it, the box model here, and it shows you the difference. So this is what we want to do, is push our content down with padding, whereas a margin would push the whole thing down. But if you had a background color, for example, of the item behind it, or I should really say around it, the bigger item like the body, then that background color could show through. So, and you know, I think I've shown enough examples using the CSS designer now. And so a lot of times I'm just going to show you what I put in here rather than necessarily you watching me type it out and making the videos longer than they need to be. But okay, so we'll go padding top, and I'll take a guess at about 33 pixels. So that's what the padding did there. Closer to our design, we're going to have to start centering a couple things, and rather than writing it right for the H1 here, and then there's an H2 tag over here that you can't see right now, let's just come up with a class of center, and then we can apply it where we need it. So we will, well, let's use this to do it, plus button, and the CSS designer, sorry, wrong one, selector plus, remember it starts with a period, and center, and then we should see this show up over here, which it did, and then we'll just put text align center. And now that that exists, we can go ahead and add that. So for example, we want to add it to this particular H1, so we go back into the source code, find that H1, there it is, put a space, start to type out class, hit enter, go, and then we see the two things that we've written, and that should take care of that. And if you check that in the browser, you should see that that has worked. And then to get this part to center, we're going to use a margin of auto. And if you want to see an explanation of that, you can go ahead and pause and read this, or go here and try out the example. But basically, auto gets things to center. It autos the margin, so it puts it in the center. So getting much closer. Now you probably noticed that all of this stuff is hiding underneath here. We need to give this a margin to kick it out, and the amount of the margin that we need is going to be the same that we applied over here to the aside, which was, I believe it was 25%. So what that means is it'll take up 25% of the available browser space. Yep, that's what it was. And if you go back and look at the HTML, you can see all of this stuff here exists inside, or is wrapped around a thing called the section tag. So if we write for that, give it a margin of 25%, that should match what we have going on in the aside. But it does need to be margin left, not all the way around. Clean that up, do a save all, check it out in the browser. And we need to just work on the spacing. And if you look at the example that I'm going for, this is not centered, or it's not center justified like in, where was the example that it was centered? Yeah, maybe I goofed up in my last example and showed this all centered. It's left justified, but it floats in the center here. So let's go ahead and take care of that. If we had a really big website with a lot of different paragraphs, we wouldn't write this just for the paragraph tag. We'd make a class. But this is a portfolio site, so it only makes sense, well, it makes sense in this case to just go ahead and write it for the paragraph tag, because there's not going to be a lot of paragraphs in here. So margin to auto, that'll get this to center without having to set the text to be centered. And then I put in some padding here. And then if we save this and look at it in a browser, we can see we still have one issue here, which is, well, we have multiple issues, but the biggest one that bothers me is no matter how big the browser gets, this paragraph just will keep on going and going, and that's just bad typography. So we're going to give this a max width. I'm going to make a guess here based on my design, and that should be about 600 pixels. So that's much better now. No matter how big the browser gets, this is still just a normal readable paragraph. We need to go ahead and center this, but before we do that, let me fix this. Remember, I did this earlier on so that it stuck out like a sore thumb, so I knew I'd have to fix it, which I still want it to stick out, but I don't want it to be quite so disruptive to what we're doing here. So the main reason is that I have this H1 tag inside of a paragraph. So how about if we just make the whole bottom part an H1, and then we'll move the paragraph tag back behind the H1. So at least the paragraph finishes. So that is okay for now. And then let's go to that H2, which is the one that says welcome. And let's add that center property to it. So we have to go into the source code and find that H2. Where are you? Oh, yeah, right here. Okay. So put a space there, start to type in class, let the program do the rest for us. So let's take care of some padding up there. So we'll find the section in our CSS and give it some padding. I took a guess at about 30. Let's tackle one more thing in this video. Let's push this down. So the start of the home button should be underneath the header, so to speak here. And what we need to do is write that for this first list item, a larger amount of padding. But if we write it for the list items, it's going to put padding between all of them and push them way too far apart. So there is that ability to talk to what they call the first child or the last child. Example of that in use where they put a border all the way around here but didn't want to double up the border on the bottom. So they used right here, last child, border bottom, none. We're going to use first child for padding. So we write a brand new bit of code for that. May as well paste it right after the last list item, and you can see that it did what it was supposed to do. Gave us padding here, but not for the other ones. Next video we'll address the footer and then start to work on getting the navigation to work for multiple pages.